Why history? To ask the question is to answer it. We need well-researched, well-written books of history to help us understand not only where we are in this very challenging times, but also where we might be going. And we're very proud to be home to a prize that celebrates international writing about global history and reaches an ever-expanding audience. The Cundill History Prize reflects the vision of its founder, Peter Cundill, a McGill alumnus, who believed passionately that good history writing can really help build better public debate.
Well, Peter was probably for over 60 years one of my very closest friends. And we grew up together in Montreal. We first met at about age 6 or 7. We went to different schools, but we played together on the street. In those days, one did so with very little traffic in the area we lived in. And whether it was football or hockey or baseball, whatever, Peter enjoyed sports of all kinds, and so did I. And we kept in touch through all our teenage and university years. We were at the same university at McGill, of course, and then he went west to Vancouver. In spite of the distance, Peter was always a very large fixture in my life.
There were many factors that contributed to Peter's success and leading to him being such a great investment manager. But if I were to highlight one, I would say it's this intense, almost aggressive curiosity. He was a great conversationalist. He drew information out of people and he absorbed information extremely well. He was an exemplary listener. And I can remember in the early years when he and Michael were establishing the award with McGill, and I would get a fax from Peter explaining who the book finalists were and his excitement about them. He genuinely took a very strong interest in the History Prize, and I think if he were to look at the success the prize has had to date and the winners, I think he'd be just delighted.
I think that Peter would be so happy with the level we've achieved in 10 years and the prospects that lie ahead for us. He didn't think that you could really comprehend the present or develop a reasonable perspective on the future unless you understood the past.
One of the things that struck me about working for the Cundill Prize is that the writers, the people who have written the books that have reached the shortlist, but indeed the writers who are on the list from the very beginning, have all spent thousands of hours researching and writing the books. And it's been a real source of satisfaction to be able to spend many, many hours ourselves as a jury winnowing down the books and arriving at a shortlist and eventually arriving at 3 finalists. It's been an extraordinary experience and one that has given great satisfaction to me and I think everybody on the jury.
So our 3 finalists this year are Prairie Fires by Caroline Fraser, The Dawn Watch by Maya Jasinoff, and Cold Welcome by Sam White. They're 3 very, very different books in their perspectives, in the topics they're trying to cover, but actually there are some similarities between them. They're all books that look at peripheries. All of these books look at the world as it's being opened up. They all look at new perspectives. They look at the challenges that we face today as well when we push forwards into new frontiers.
Caroline Fraser's Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder, is an extraordinary work of history. An uncanny ability to weave together history, biography, and just exquisite writing. Caroline Fraser really retells us the story of not just Laura Ingalls Wilder, but really the movement towards the American West, Western expansion. And I think it's this hallmark that Fraser is able to do with this work of retelling and unpacking the myths of the westward expansion together with the myths of Laura Ingalls Wilder through a narrative that frankly is so captivating that just puts his book apart in terms of biography, a work of history, and frankly just a work that is novel in its reading but also deeply researched. You know, her writing, I have to say, I read this book more than once. And I read it more than once. Once I was on the jury, I sort of had to, but I would have done it anyway. And I did that because I myself aspire, frankly, to be the kind of writer that Fraser is. I mentioned, she has this eye to detail, but the craft of her narrative, the ways in which I could literally feel the locust swarms, literally feel the poverty of the West, the capriciousness, the ways in which sort of the ill fate of the Ingalls family chased them across the western frontier. And she brings you there with this immediacy in her writing that is simply exquisite.
Maya Jasanoff's The Dawn Watch, Joseph Conrad and the Global World. She's actually produced a book that is part literary history. It's cultural history, because after all, Conrad grew up in Poland and traveled all over the world and then settled in the United Kingdom. It's some political history, if I can put it that way. And it's a very innovative book because she basically says, whatever you might think of Joseph Conrad, he actually has a great deal to say about today's discontents. It's not a straight biography. It's not a piece of literary criticism, although there's a lot of literary history in it. It's not a piece of cultural anthropology, although there's some of that in it. It's not a travelogue, although there's some of that in it. It's a book about England as it was, but it's also about the world as it was, and England in the world, because he settled in England. And so I think it's the knitting together of all of that that provides a kind of multifaceted tapestry, if I can put it that way, for a book. That's what makes it, I think, for the jury extremely interesting.
A Cold Welcome, The Little Ice Age and Europe's Encounter with North America by Sam White is an exciting and innovative book that employs interdisciplinary skills. He uses archaeology, he uses climate science and traditional historical sources to take a look at why some settlements succeeded and some failed in North America. Although it's focused on this remarkable climate phenomenon, he never loses sight of the fact that it is human decisions and human efforts that determine whether a colony or a settlement succeeds or fails. General readers, I think, will be fascinated throughout at this look of what happens when you introduce a brand new factor into something they thought they understood well. I would say personally, as someone who works in this field, this area, that I'm really quite happy to say that I will have to revise every lecture that I've ever given on subjects like why the indigenous population declined, why the structure of their communities changed, on why Roanoke disappeared, on what the European policymakers thought they were doing. And I will do it with great relish, because here's a book that illuminates those topics much better than books in the past.
It's so exciting to have these 3 books as finalists for the Cundill History Prize. They're all so different, and yet they're all very much alike in that they challenge us to look at history differently.